All right. Let's just waiting for Instagram. All right. We are live. Awesome. Welcome back to episode 97 of the After Action Project. It's hard to believe that over the last 5 or 6 years, we've been able to crank out 97 entire episodes. So we appreciate y'all joining us. Tonight, we have a great episode lined up for you. We have some of the industry's top professionals. We're going to be doing an open roundtable discussion on some of the hot topics and the hot takes from, the different social media stuff that we've been seeing and talk about firearms training. And all of that good stuff. If you like what we're doing and would like to help support the show, visit patreon.com/afteractionproject. After Action Project is brought to you in part by Locked In Grip and Range Buddy. Locked In Grip is it's a liquid sports chalk kind of designed for shooters. The folks over at the Complete Combatant are bringing you Locked In Grip. For more info, you can check out lockedingrip.com. And kind of the selling point is if you've ever lost your shooting grip, your grip after a couple of rounds, where you start milking it, your hands are sweaty because you're out there with one of these celebrity firearms instructors and you just get real nervous talking to them. Your hands get a little bit sweaty, your knees get a little bit weak. Locked In Grip solves the sweaty hands part for you. It's a grip enhancer that keeps your hands free of moisture to create a slip-free connection to the action of shooting your firearm. Locked In Grip is made for shooters by shooters. It's not one of these other things that are kind of been repurposed or rehoused. And then visit lockedingrip.com to purchase your liquid shooting sports chalk. It's something that I carry on me in my range bag. And if I have students out there on the range, it's every now and then I'll give them a little dab on their hands to just kind of give them one less thing to worry about. The other show sponsor you guys have heard me talking about is the Range Buddy app. You can go to rangebuddy.app. It's available on your favorite app store, either iOS or Android. It's a collection of over 100 shooting drills, all sorted by the required target type. So if you're going out there with a couple B8 targets, you just click on the B8 targets and it'll give you all the different drills that you can run with that. There's a virtual instructor component on there that's super exciting and cool, something that I enjoy. It's probably my favorite part of that deal, whether I'm working it, using it in dry fire or live fire. There's a favorites list, so you can quickly find all of your favorite drills, and then the integrated leaderboard, so you can see how well you're shooting compared to your buddies and some other shooters that have shot that drill. We've run a featured drill of the month. This month, it's the Active Self-Protection 10-round skills check drill. We're going to be doing a giveaway in conjunction with that. So at the end of the month or the beginning of April, we're going to be choosing a random winner based on the leaderboard position. So if you guys want to get in on that, we're going to be doing a free annual subscription to the Active Self-Protection Unlimited app. And I think that's it. We got a pretty exciting rollout that we're getting ready to launch here in the next week or so. Hopefully, we're going to be doing our first round of beta testing here in the next couple of days. So check it out at rangebuddy.app. And then let's get into what everybody's here for, right? Tonight's show. So we're going to kick it around the horn. I'm going to let each of these esteemed instructors kind of talk about themselves for a few minutes because they're much better at the talking piece than I am. And we'll kind of kick it off with Chris Bean. So go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners. Where can they find you and what got you into the firearms training world?
Hi, I'm Christopher Bean. I run a small company called Tactical Advantage. I also am affiliated with Active Self-Protection as the co-director of their instructor certification program. Consult with quite a few other people in the industry trying to help them better the learning efficacy of their curriculums. So been doing that for about 25 years or so. I think I've been doing this professionally. So I'm dating myself, but oh wow. Really right now, the best place to find me is anything involved with Active Self-Protection. If you go on their website, activeselfprotection.com, you can track down my bio and some of my doings there. Currently working on my website for Tactical Advantage. That should be up in relatively short order. And that's about it for me.
Awesome. Tim, kick it over to you. Where can shooters find more out about you and what got you into the firearms training industry?
Oh, gosh. So, yeah, I'm Tim with Tim Heron Shooting. I've been a trainer kind of traveling all over the country now for a better part of 5 years now, going on 6. they can find out, I guess, the most about me through my website, timheronshooting.com. It's got my schedule, classes that I offer, and all that good stuff in there as well. I always kind of pride myself in trying to be one of the most accessible instructors or trainers, in the country, so like whether it be on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. I've got a whole YouTube series of videos and things as well. So, but I primarily teach the performance shooting aspect of things. So neither really delving into the self-defense side, but also trying to eliminate the stigma of being that competition guy. I kind of walk the line between both. I think I do an okay job of that.
Awesome. I would agree. Memphis, let's kick it over to you, buddy.
Yeah, hey folks. My name is Mikos Beach. I usually go by Memphis Beach online because that's where I'm from. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I served for 9 years. I'm a competitive shooter. I shoot mostly IDPA and USPSA, and also teach classes up here in Memphis, Tennessee. I teach how to Top Gun Memphis, and I drink coffee, I shoot stuff, and I know things. So, let's see. You can find more information and book classes and get some online coaching at memphisbeach.com. And we can also book classes at topgunmemphis.com.
I love it. And then last but certainly not least, Dan Brady. Talk to us a little bit about yourself.
As Jeremy said, my name's Dan Brady. I work for a company called Apache Solutions out of Yadkinville, North Carolina. You can find us and me at apachenc.com. I've been a cop for a better part of 25 years now. I really have tried to divorce the defensive shooting world from the law enforcement applications that a lot of drills and a lot of tactics have sort of developed out of. People have sort of bastardized law enforcement information and law enforcement tactics for civilian usage. But the fact of the matter is that the mission sets between the civilian defender and the law enforcement officer are diametrically opposed, and what is good for one is not necessarily good for the other. I have played around with competitive shooting, Steel Challenge, IDPA, USPSA, all at one point or another. And Christopher Bean's a pretty good friend of mine, and I consider Tim Heron a friend and a mentor as well. One of these days, I'll get to meet my fellow jarhead Memphis Beach face to face, shake his hand, smoke a cigar, and have a good time.
Awesome. And I don't know if we could start the episode off with a better or more controversial topic than lanes. And I'd like to get everybody's kind of feedback and really kind of let's get into defining and setting out what the different lanes within firearms training or the sport of firearms are. And we did an Indian leg wrestling contest before tonight's episode to determine who the winner was. And you guys wouldn't believe it, but it was a 4-way tie. So I'm going to kick it over to whoever wants to start us off first. If there's anybody that's super passionate about this or wants to kind of lead into it, we can go there, or I guess I can kind of give my thoughts and we can kind of expand on those, whatever you guys are thinking. If this is your first episode with us, yes, I am the world's laziest podcast interviewer. Okay. I ask generic questions. I leave this all vagueness up to our guests to kind of sort out in real time.
Let's start with it and just make it a little easy, because we do have some military vets. We got a cop on here, believe it or not. So, that's one of the things you see on the internet all the time, right? Or even for us, Jeremy and I, we're concealed carry instructors. We're gateway instructors, what we call ourselves. Very often, people will hear, "Oh, how you're a concealed carry instructor, huh? That's great. Law enforcement, military? No, we're neither. We're just civilians." Oh, and then you see the face just kind of wash out. It's like, oh, well, you guys have no value for me. So I think I want to start with Tim, being that Tim's not law enforcement military. Give us a little opinion on that, and then let's kick it over to Dan and then move it around, because we do have some cops and military in here. and just tell us what the advantage and disadvantage of those things are.
For me, I think like staying in your lane or knowing your audience is extremely important. I do think that both civilians or students, not even just civilians, but students tend to, because they don't really know how to truly vet an instructor or a trainer, right? I mean, so the two really things that pop up into anybody's mind are, well, who carries guns professionally? Military and law enforcement. So if they've got to carry a firearm professionally, surely that they're they're knowledgeable, which it's unfortunate, but it is the truth. I mean, it's before I really got into firearms, and didn't know anything about what I didn't know. Long ago, I was the same way. Like I I did my vetting as far as instructorship, to instructors that I was, wanting to become familiar with based on what was their background. Were they military? Check that, checked a box. Okay, cool. Are they also active or previous law enforcement? Oh, it's some sort of government rating or law enforcement, city, county, state. Okay, check. Cool. They're probably worth my time. And then you realize after after a few sessions with some kind of unfortunately less than knowledgeable instructors that have that typical background, that's not what you're looking for. Then I think you along the way, then as a student, kind of the art, you kind of realize like, okay, I need to find somebody that has the knowledge of something that I'm looking to obtain, right? So you look for true what we call SMEs, or subject matter experts. So I began teaching in about 2015 and made this my full-time career in 2018. And I have no prior military, no prior law enforcement. I've come strictly from a civilian background. I was I was what we call a hobbyist. So I got into the sport of shooting, basically on a need that I saw, and I saw a potential need for a firearm to protect myself or my family, right? And I think many people consider that as something that, maybe that's kind of where they walk the line. They don't really seek out the other things that a firearm could be used for, like for sport or for hunting or whatever, especially when it comes to handguns. Like handguns are a self-defense item only, and I'm going to go get my concealed carry with it, and that's what it's for. It's for serious business and serious business only. Very, very shortly after, kind of getting into firearms and with pistols, that's when I found USPSA. And for me, coming from a very competitive background prior to that, in autocross and sports car racing, for me, it was like, oh my God, this is like my calling now. Like I get to race other people, but with a pistol. How awesome is this? So, and that's kind of where I really like kind of found my lane. And that's my background. So I'm a 4-division USPSA Grandmaster, a 2-division IDPA Master. I've gotten good enough at this sport to be able to kind of compete at the upper echelon, levels for a number of years now. And that's my lane. I don't teach tactics or self-defense, tactics. I try not to delve into the things that I don't know anything about. So I don't teach night vision stuff. I don't teach carbine stuff. I don't teach shotgun stuff. I don't teach force on force. I don't teach low light. It's just because it's not that those things don't interest me, but I know that like truly what my niche and what my specialty is. And I would much rather be a master in what I truly know, and in that depth of knowledge, to be able to share with folks like truly what my mastery level is, then dare I say kind of be that, that type of trainer that's like a jack of all trades, but really not a master of any, like, oh, I'm going to teach some mindset stuff. And, oh, I'm going to teach some shotgun stuff. And, oh, I'm going to teach some carbine stuff. And when somebody asks you like, okay, great, what is your true specialty? And they're like, a little bit of everything, it's like, no, I want to be that guy. And I still do, Like I strive to be that guy that if you've got a question regarding how to shoot a pistol at your absolute pinnacle of your physical level, I can be the guy to hopefully be able to answer any question you may have about that. And other than that, I'm knowledgeable enough to seek out or know who to direct you to for many of those other, kind of niches in the market, but as far as like wanting to try to be a subject matter expert on many, many subjects, man, I have a hell of enough time just trying to master a pistol, let alone like let me feel or build my own confidence enough to think, to feel that I'm confident enough to teach you all of these other aspects. There's other people that are way more versed in those things than I am. So that's kind of my lane. My lane is performance shooting and performance shooting only. As far as like speaking from a mindset or a mental management side of things, all I can do is give you what I know has worked for me based on my own particular findings or experience levels. And that's about it, or what I've learned from other people. But as far as like, if you said, hey, are you a mental management expert? Nope. But I know just the guy to send you to. Chris.
Yeah, that's so you brought up some great points that I want to dive into after we get kind of everybody else's opinion on the lanes. It's awesome that you brought up mental management because I think Chris is the subject matter expert on that. So we talked about the competitive shooting lane, the performance side of the lane, and then Andy, mentioned kicking it over to Dan. So I want to kind of follow that format. Dan, in your intro, you talked about you spent a lot of time trying to dispel and kind of get rid of this law enforcement versus civilian mentality. So if you could talk to us a little bit more about that, and with your law enforcement background, if you could touch on the law enforcement lane, and is there a specific lane that this is for LE only, and kind of how that relates to the training that you provide?
I don't know that there is a lane specifically for law enforcement only, unless you're talking about contextually driven classes, things like collapsing a structure, doing entries into occupied structures. If you're talking about night vision warrant service and things that, yes, those are contextually driven educational experiences that are very, very specific to either law enforcement or very tiny branches of the military environment. When it comes to defensive applications of shooting, I think Tim, kind of touched on this well, sort of set me up for, the lane conversation. People have generalized, this is very, very general, people have this idea that law enforcement officers, police officers, federal agents, however you want to say this, because they carry a gun every day, are gun experts. But the fact of the matter is that very, very few law enforcement officers are even remotely qualified to teach anything but, this is the end that the bullets come out of. This is the thing that makes the bullets come out. This is the place that you feed the bullets. I mean, it's really that basic. What most people don't understand is that the qualifications that law enforcement officers are subjected to annually, semi-annually, if you're in a high-speed department, quarterly, passing almost any police qualification, law enforcement qualification in America is, are you breathing and can you see past about 10 yards? There's really no, I don't want to say no skill, but there is a very, very low bar of skill involved in shooting a handgun to a qualifying standard for most departments, most agencies in America. It is a widely held belief that the most difficult law enforcement qualification in the United States is the old Federal Air Marshal's tactical pistol course, the one that existed prior to 9/11. It was held as the hardest, the most rigorous law enforcement qualification in America, and it probably is. That and the old Bakersfield qualification are probably the hardest to pass on demand pistol qualifications for policing in America.
They
And
also can't be passed with anybody with an optics pistol. I heard that someplace.
That comment or something similar to that comment was stated at some point recently. I believe the exact quote was, "Nobody had done so, not that they could not." But I don't know. I don't have the quote in front of me. Tim's there just laughing his little keister off. Those qualifications aren't that difficult to pass. Whereas if you look from a raw pistol shooting perspective, any of the USPSA classifier stages, any of how many exist, Tim? Do you know how many there are? There's dozens. There are dozens of classifiers. Any of
Maybe well
those,
over 90. I'm not for sure how many there are now.
I mean, it's close. It's got to be closing in on 100. It's got to be.
Yeah.
So any of those classifiers, shooting those at above an A class, maybe 1% of police officers in the United States could pass that. Maybe. And anybody can feel free to disagree with my guess, but based on the police competitions I've been involved in, and based on the shooting community that I have known over the last couple of decades, there's not too many police officers in America who are going to qualify or classify USPSA A class or above. It's just not going to happen. That is an incredibly high level of technical pistol shooting as compared to the vast majority of police or concealed carriers out there. It just is. What I think the police experience can bring, not always, but can bring into the classroom environment for the concealed carrier, for the armed citizen, however you want to phrase that, is a certain amount of experiential fear. Having gone into face-to-face confrontations with people who have your worst intentions in mind, being able to relate that to students, being able to provide them some context of what it feels like to be involved in the decision-making process that could very well end up with somebody's life being taken, I think that can be very illuminating for some students. Not all, but some. I think from a law enforcement perspective, having been involved in a number of encounters that involved a substantial amount of interpersonal violence, I think being able to relate that to students can be important. I think the decision-making aspects involved in the three-dimensional world that we live in, relating that can be important. But generally speaking, the law enforcement officer has such a different mission set from the concealed carrier, from the armed citizen, from the home defender, that the application of technique and, to be completely frank, the technical abilities to operate a handgun at a very, very high level just simply don't come from law enforcement officers.
Yeah, that makes plenty of sense. So first of all, for those that are watching tonight, if you see Dan sitting here being very serious with his answer, and if you look around the room within the room and everybody's kind of giggling and laughing, we have kind of a little sidebar chat going on. So everybody's kind of making fun of Dan while he's talking. We're not making fun of Dan is what he's saying. So I just want to be very clear here, because it kind of looks like, why is everybody making fun of Dan when he's just sitting there trying to be serious? So anyway, first part of it is so a couple experiences I had recently. I did our local sheriff office academy, and we were sitting in class, and the guy comes up to present, and I said, "Hey, what kind of gun is that?" And he looks down. He's like, "Oh, this one." And I said, "Yeah. What kind of gun?" He's like, "Oh, I don't know. I'm not a gun guy." And I'm like, "Wait, but you're like the head sheriff dude that's gonna present for us for 12 weeks, right?" So then they send us out to the gun range where Jeremy and I pretty much live. It's right next door. And I look up on the wall right behind the SWAT guy that's presenting, and they have the beautiful, wheel target, the wheel of death of like milking and too much trigger finger and all that. And I said, "Hey, do you guys actually use that target?" And he's like, "Oh, that target?" He's like, "Yeah, that'll kind of diagnose some problems." And I'm like, "You're joking with me, right?" And he got super upset with me, and he handed me the pointer. And he goes, "You want to run the show?" And I was like, "No, man, I'm just asking the question. I was just curious." But he was very serious about that target. So yeah, just to follow up some of the things Dan's saying, it's awfully true, and it's nice to see have a police officer come up and tell guys, because typically they hear it from me, who's not a cop, and they're like, "Yeah, whatever, you're not a cop. That's why you're saying they're no good, because you're that instructor." So, um,
No, it's my
anyway,
opinion. It's my opinion that if you want to learn how to run a gun to a high degree of proficiency, the vast majority of the time, you want to talk to somebody like Tim Herron or Memphis Beach or another high level competitor, somebody who is a really good pistol operator, really good. And I'm not saying I'm terrible, but I'm definitely not at Tim's level. Having trained with Tim, I can't do what he can do.
yeah, well, here's the thing, right? So, Dan, you're a cop and you know how to shoot, right? And so there's that whole line of like most cops, 99.9%, can't shoot. It's the important guys like Dan who actually puts in the time, goes and sees guys like Tim, like Chris, like everybody else, that actually has that ability to share what he's learned beyond law enforcement, specifically just pistol shooting. I'm not talking about everything else like you mentioned, which makes sense. But now we have Memphis, former Marine. Now we're going to go over into the military realm, right? Well, if I want to go to a pistol instructor, got to go to a Marine, right? Right, Memphis?
Like, would it surprise you for me to say that military veterans are not necessarily the best people to learn pistol craft from? Like, would that be surprising to anybody in the room or anybody that's in this space that may be watching here? I don't think it would. So the main thing I have to, well, a lot of the stuff that I do is with private lessons and with classes that are just a little bit above your basic permit. You know what I mean? So I'll still help out with permit classes. I'll diagnose, I'll AI, but most of the classes that I teach are, beyond the permit. Um, in saying that, whenever someone, they look at stuff like this, it's like, okay, well, he's a military veteran, he's a Marine, he has to know how to shoot, right? Well, as far as staying in my lane goes, I have to remember that it's not about me. Okay. It's not about making it, you know, like, hey, how good can I make myself sound? Or, how can I impress somebody? What's the best possible advice that I can give to someone? And in order for me to give that, I have to understand a little bit more about what their goals are, what their mission statement is. And if it's outside of my lane, I need to be able to let them know about that and direct them into the proper lane. So, like, if someone comes up to me and says, hey, I want to be a GM in USPSA. All right, that's fantastic. I do too. Let's learn together, right? Or, if someone is like, hey, I'm really looking for a good force on force instructor, or I'm looking for, a combatives instructor, or I'm looking for, a mental management coach. Guess what? There's stuff that we can do with that. Um, it's not going to be here. All right. So, as far as staying in my lane goes, I think what has to happen is you have to have a lot of emotional maturity, and you have to know yourself a lot more in order for you to know what your lane is. And you have to, you got to be enough of a man to actually admit that, hey, this isn't something that I'm an expert in. I'm not qualified to give that kind of advice.
Yeah, and I want to be very clear here, because I think sometimes the water gets a little muddy, right? When this comes up in these Facebook pages, then you say, "What are you talking about? Cops can't shoot, military dudes can't shoot," and then they get kind of this offense of like, "What do you mean? I served, I gave my life." I want to be very clear, very appreciative for you military dudes. I wasn't one of them. My path was a little bit different. My path was being a knucklehead when I was younger. But for you, Memphis and Dan, we appreciate what you do. We appreciate how you serve, how you protect the community, how you protect this country. But we have to keep those lines separate, in my opinion. We appreciate you serve, but just because you serve doesn't mean you're the go-to expert. The go-to expert's exactly like we're talking about. Would you agree, Chris, or would you disagree with me on that?
Oh no, I agree. And then I'm just kind of chuckling too because Tim has heard me go off on this plank ad nauseum. But my biggest issue with all of this and like staying in your lane, staying in your area of speciality, I believe the problem's in the frame. So if you're a student and you're looking to work with somebody, what is it that you want to learn? If you're an instructor, what is it that you want to be good at? And the reason I'm kind of leading it up like that is there's this mentality that everyone should know everything. And I kind of live in the world of the specialist versus the generalist. So like the generalist, that would be, the vocation of service, like, Leo, mill guys, that's a generalist. People think it's a specialist thing, but it's not. They have to have a myriad of skills that are incredibly important to keep them and you alive. So there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but they don't have time to be a specialist. And then unless you're really one of the very rare breed that decide on your own time you want to get good at something. So I think that's a big part of it. So the specialist kind of brand, that would be like your performance coaches, your high level competitors, things like that, that they have invested in one particular, or well, really a myriad, but one particular speciality that makes them very, very, very good at something. If you're trying to learn something like that, that's where you want to head. If you want to learn general defensive stuff, that's a different road. It's simply a different road. Not one is better than the other. They're just different. I think what happens that's pretty pervasive in the industry is people just don't want to say, I don't know. If someone comes up and starts talking to me about shotgun, I don't know. And I'm not ashamed to say that. It's just not what I'm good at. And much like Tim said, I will gladly direct those to somebody in my sphere that's better at that than me. If more people did that, it'd be great. There'd be a lot less arguments. It's a nutcracker for people, especially at the instructor level, to say, I don't know, because there's this prevalent feeling that everyone needs to be the best at everything. And it's just not how the world works. I think there's some misnomers out there that people run into where they present as something they're not because they don't have the ability to actually admit that they're not good at something. And I think that's dangerous, especially in the vocation that we've all chosen to kind of work in. If you don't 100% know, you're going to get people hurt one way or the other. And that's where I get pretty serious about this. To get to the specialist level, it takes a significant amount of self-work, a significant amount of exploration, and you cannot have a cursory understanding of the subject and teach that to others and expect a quality result. So the last thing with all of that I'll kind of put out there is, it's like if you wanted to be an F1 driver, you are not going to go to Joe Bob's tractor trailer driving school to learn how to do that. But if you want to be a truck driver, that's absolutely where you want to go. I think we have to define what one's looking for.
That makes sense. I think for me, the stay in your lane, it begins to be a kind of a hot button issue for me. Because I think there are people out there that they kind of incorrectly interpret when we have a performance shooter, right? Or somebody who's in the performance lane, teaching military or LE guys. And I just kind of want to be like, hey, no, that's not that it doesn't mean that if you have a performance shooting instructor, that they cannot have a conversation with military or LE guys, because part of what the performance shooters do, the quote unquote gamers do, shoot fast and accurately under some pressure, can also be applied to dudes in the military and the LE world. And it's one of these things where I don't know. We've taken we've come great strides in the past decade or so with kind of reshaping and reframing what firearms training is and what a great firearms instructor should be. And we're still holding on to some of these legacy concepts, right? Like the old model used to be, it was .gov and civilian, and those were the only two lanes that there were in the firearms training world. And the civilian trainers absolutely couldn't come over into the .gov world, and the .gov world just kind of stayed out of it. And I think with where we are at now today with the firearms training, the quality of firearms training, is that there's a ton of overlap with that stuff, right? It's military guys and LE guys. For me, kind of the civilian dude that I am, the biggest differentiating factor there is tactics driven, right? And it's, as Tim himself said, hey, I'm not teaching tactics. I'll teach you how to shoot fast and accurate all day. That's his wheelhouse. But to discredit everything because a dude hasn't been into a gunfight on the streets, it's like, well, if those are the only dudes that we're training, that we're going to go out and see quality instruction from, it's probably not going to be they're a military dude or a LE guy. There are a ton of civilian defenders out there that have been in gunfight, and they probably couldn't tell you what the heck they did right, what the heck they did wrong, and luck played a good part in what they were doing. So when we're talking about staying in our lanes, I think where we're at today, there's a lot more crossover, as there should be, just because it's shooting guns, right? Like outside of the tactics world of things, it's shooting guns, right? It's not incredibly difficult. And if you want to level up your performance, you probably should go train with a dude that does that. If you want to work on your mental management game, right? Like that's a huge component of it, both in the civilian side, like the self-defender side of things, and the performance shooting side of the deal. And then wanted to follow up on another, so kind of in the same vein as the staying in the lanes, who's the audience out there for firearms instructors, and are we creating an echo chamber? And kind of what I want to dig into on that is, is one of those things where, take it easy, Tim. Appreciate you jumping on with us, bud. It's one of those things where, Memphis has said, would anybody be surprised to hear that a military dude isn't the expert on the handgun? And it's do we forget some of that conversation? And it's something that I challenge Andy on with our students. And it's like, hey, our students are not the same students that are training with Tim Herron or Dan Brady or Chris Bean, right? Like there's a vast level of skill and knowledge between that happening. So are we doing ourselves a disservice by speaking about this in such a manner where we expect everybody to have a higher baseline understanding and knowledge of what we do than they might actually have? So Dan, I want to kick that over to you.
So Memphis asked the question, and you just reiterated it. Would anybody be surprised that the military dude is not the highest end shooter? Yeah, the military dude would be surprised. The number of young Marines, I live right next door to a Marine base. I work on a Marine base. The number of young Marines I have in my local classes who believe themselves to be highly skilled probably approaches 70%. And when they are faced with something simple, a simple test that everybody in the shooting world has done many times, something like the test, a 10-10-10 drill, and I say, you have 10 seconds to do this, and you have to score an 80 or better, right? So keeping it inside the 8 ring in 10 seconds, I believe everybody on this particular podcast right now could do that probably close to with their eyes closed, as long as they were lined up with the target. I had a friend of mine who's a long-term cop, a retired Marine. I had him run a 10-10-10 last year, and he shot a 62, and it took him 22 seconds to do it. that is not a level of shooting that you would that the common person who looks at a military member would expect to be there. When you put that drill on a body size target, which is what most law enforcement officers are looking at, a FBI Q, you're looking at something that is 14 to 18 inches wide, that's 20 to 24 inches high, and has these massive scoring zones, not a 10 ring on a B8, which is 3.5 inches in diameter. And people come under this impression in military service and law enforcement that anywhere on here is a valid hit. It is a combat effective hit. And that is simply not true. A combat effective hit covers an area about this big, about 8 inches in diameter, which is what, the 8 ring on a B8. But this, or this, or this is worth the same amount of points as this on these law enforcement targets, which is where people come under this impression, well, I shot 100% on my law enforcement qual for 10 years in a row. Yeah, but what was your time standard like? What was your accuracy standard like? The vast majority of them aren't substantial. And after a career doing this, if you stay within that field, within that lane of just law enforcement and law enforcement qualification, you believe that you're actually an expert because you shot 100 for 15 years in a row. You actually have this belief that you're an expert. And I have these conversations online all the time with retired police officers who are NRA instructors or USCCA instructors, and that's their first sort of departure from their qualification. And that they are the most surprised when they have somebody who has been in the performance shooting world who now wants to have an instructor qualification, so they go to an NRA or a USCCA, but they're already an A-class USPSA shooter, and they shoot a qual group this big, with a couple of magazines. They're blown away that that sort of shooting is even possible. So the problem boils down to the fact that in these professional industries, law enforcement and military, the standard to be deemed competent is so low that if you shoot a 90, 95, or 100, and you are looked at as an expert for years on end, you begin to believe it yourself. That's the basic problem with that. So I'll step off my soapbox now.
That's a great point. Had a great question kind of posed to me. Neil asked, and he wants to know, in the instructor community, there's a focus on staying in your lane. At what point does it become acceptable for an instructor to expand their scope in their lane? And then what markers are you guys looking for before you say, hey, yeah, this guy, that's also within their wheelhouse. That's also their lane. Memphis, I want to kick that up to you first, put you in the hot seat.
Yeah, sure. So, like, when would I expect? When would I expand my lane? Man, that takes a lot of self-awareness. That takes a lot of like soul searching. You know what I mean? Because it's really easy to like pigeonhole yourself, and you hear it all the time. You hear it constantly. Like, I only teach new students, right? Like, instructors will tell themselves that they only teach new students, so all they need to be proficient with is, the state qualification for their CCW, or all I teach is law enforcement, so all I need to be proficient with is the law enforcement standard. It takes a lot of self-awareness, and it takes a lot of passion in order for you to really kind of continue being an eternal student, a perpetual student. Let's see. So when do you expand your lane? When I deem that it's better for my students and for my clients to do so. Like, if there's like an actual benefit for my clients, I'm gonna do that. Like, I'm gonna throw in a shameless plug for the active self-protection instructor certification, right? I'm gonna throw in a shameless plug for the Range Master instructor certification. I'll even throw in a shameless plug for, like some of these other certifications that actually make you a better teacher and a better diagnostician and a better coach. You know what I mean? Like I'm really, really amped for deliberate coaching by Brian Hill of The Complete Combatant. Why? Because I think that there's a benefit to my clients for me to be a better diagnostician. So there's a huge client there. I can't call myself Memphis Beach Coaching and not be a good coach. That just does not make any sense. So, but yeah, that would be my answer for that. You just got to know yourself well enough to know where your knowledge gaps are.
That's a great answer. I don't know if Chris and Dan are going to be able to top that. I want to kick it over to Chris, give him the opportunity to kind of expand on that. And that's a hugely valid point. And again, over the last couple of years, and not Rangemaster, right? Excluding Rangemaster, they've been around doing the instructor development piece for a while. And Chris, you're intimately connected with the ASP instructor development program over there. So we're starting to see this focus turn to, hey, let's make instructors as good as they can be, as great as they can be in their current lane. And there's also an avenue for kind of expanding their lane and bringing on some additional skills that they're able to provide their students. So Chris, let's get your expansion on those things.
Yeah, I'd love to touch on that, but can I circle back to the question you had really quick before when we were talking about like the level of your students and what that kind of means?
Absolutely.
And it kind of leads into that, but I think the important thing to remember, if you as an instructor, if your class success is dependent on the aptitude of your students, you're probably doing something wrong. So if the only measure you can have of success is that your students are already highly proficient when they get to you, are you truly effective at what you're doing? You should be able to kind of work with anyone to get a positive result. Now that result may differ, but you should be able to work with anyone and get a positive result. So that was something I really wanted to frame, because that's important, because I think a lot of people, they bring in clientele and their clientele's performance is the metric in which they base their success as a coach on. And I think one has to be careful of that and think through that very, very carefully. So as far as branching out, I think that kind of goes back to my answer on the first question, where you as an instructor, what is it that you're passionate about? What do you want to learn about? What do you want to know and understand? So I'm not part of the camp that says, well, if you've never been in defensive shooting, you can't teach defensive handgun. I think that's horse pucky. Sorry, hot take. The concepts are relatively universal, things like that. However, you should be a student of the craft. I think that's important. So if you're not passionate about what you're trying to pass on to your clientele, how do you expect them to be passionate about learning it? So I think people, as they get good at something, they understand their delivery techniques, things like that. Certainly look into other things to augment your offerings. Certainly. But make sure you understand it before you put it out. Pressure test it. Find a group of friends and people that you can talk through those things with, and have people poke holes in it. So when it's time to deliver that to somebody, that this may be the only time that they talk to somebody in a professional capacity. It literally may be the only time. Give them the best information possible. That's like my take on that. Sorry, I don't compromise.
No, hallelujah for that, man. It was, I've told the story, I think, once before on the podcast years ago. When I first started getting into instructing, there was an owner of a local gun store that I naively looked up to, and I sought his approval. So I was talking to him, hey, gonna start doing concealed carry stuff. This is kind of some of the stuff that I was going to lay out. And one of the things that I was adamant about was doing holster work in the class. And I remember he was like, no, don't do that. Then you won't be able to charge them for an extra class. And my mindset at the time and to this day is like, this is the only class that they are going to take. And if they go out and they receive additional training later on, hallelujah, great. That's awesome. But we're coming into this with the understanding that for the vast majority of our students, this is going to be the only firearms course that they take, and it is on us to give them the skill, at least the bare minimum skills they need to do the thing with their defensive handgun. It's concealed carry, right? Part of that deal is you might have to get the damn gun out of the holster and into the fight. And how dare us withhold that from these folks that have entrusted us to give them the skills and the knowledge that they need with regards to concealed carry. So it's one of the, again, that's horse cocky, right? It's like, hey man, this is it can't all be about money. And if it was all about money, and I think that's why the folks on this panel are regarded as highly as they are, because it's not the development and the devotion that you guys have to what you do is far above and beyond that, right? Like, you don't need the amount of classes and the personal development and the time that you guys spend developing who you are as instructors. It's quite frankly not necessary, right? Like, you don't need to do that to run the business, right? There are plenty of guys out there making good money without doing that. And it's because you have that intrinsic motivation that you want to be better for yourself and for your students, that you're continuing to kind of expand on what you're offering and how you offer it, right? It's one of those things where, and I don't know if it's just because I've been blind to it, but for me, it's one of the more exciting parts about the time that we are in with regards to the firearms training industry. At no point in history have we had the opportunity as students to train with the level of people that we can train with. And we're in this kind of not phasing out period, but Ernest Langdon is going to retire. And I don't know if that's public knowledge. I saw it publicly on Facebook, so I don't feel terrible about sharing that, right? At some point, Tom Givens is going to retire. Masada Ayoub's going to retire. We've lost great firearms instructors, right? In the past few years, where a portion of their knowledge and their experience is gone. So the fact that we have you guys and others like you kind of devoting yourself to that craft is awesome. So let me get off my soapbox. I know, Dan, you haven't had a chance to chime in on how, at what point do we, the collective we as a firearms training industry, accept that somebody can now teach in this additional lane, and what markers are you looking for to kind of give your, like, oh yeah, I would go to that dude to train with him for that thing?
When my peers are mentors who are already SMEs in that particular lane, tell me, yeah, you've got a solid handle on this. Chris alluded to this with his comment of having people pressure test your stuff, right? So Apache developed a instructor enrichment curriculum recently. Well, I mean, we started a couple of years ago, but we rolled it out fairly recently. Chris joined us for the sort of public alpha test, if you will. It was actually the beta test, and but we pressure tested that, and we shipped that to all kinds of people who've been teaching firearms instructor stuff for a long time, most specifically the Rangemaster family, and had them look at a lot of the stuff that we had developed together as a cadre and been like, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? How about this? We had them sit there and be like, try to poke holes in this, try to poke holes in this. Does this hold up under pressure? And, it took multiple iterations for us to be comfortable with having a selection of people come in and actually pay us money to roll this out in front of them. And we got excellent feedback on that curriculum, and we'll put our next iteration out this coming June, I believe. Like any curriculum, it should constantly be in development. It should constantly be evolving. Just because I teach one particular handgun class several times over several years doesn't mean that that class is the same as it was the first time I taught it. There's a consistent evolution that takes place, and that should keep up with new information as it becomes. Oh, there's an awareness of it. There is a prevalence of it, and that's one of the greatest things that the Active Self Protection podcast has done, or YouTube channel has done, is really inform the firearms carrying public what is actually taking place during defensive encounters in huge numbers that gives us statistical relevance. So when can we expand our lanes? When our peers and mentors tell us that we have enough of a mastery of the subject to take people's money and feel as if we are doing those students credit, because it's the students that matter. Memphis says that a lot, so I give him that credit.
Man, that's a great segue into I guess a comment that Catherine made. I was fortunate enough to find one great instructor and watch who they talked about as being good or who they took classes from, and it served them well. And I think at the student level, that's an absolutely critical thing to understand. And I don't know at what point that kind of clicked with me. And I think it was through this podcast, because Andy and I, we would talk about instructors that we wanted to have on. And it started out as a big list, and then very narrow list. And it was like, all right, cool. We have 2 episodes left because these are the only 2 dudes that I think are, you know what I mean? And then I was like, oh, I'm an idiot because these 2 dudes are starting to talk about these folks. And it kind of grew now to where it's a really good size of like the number of great instructors that are available to students. It's from my seat, my perspective, is it's somewhat surprising. And that's after having gone through and I'm seeing, okay, hey man, there's a lot of this stuff that is just certificate mills at the concealed carry level. And then it was like, well, who's out here teaching this? Well, now I have to wait until some guy comes to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and hope that they're legitimate. And now it's like, no, man, there are a ton of great instructors out there. And it's a conversation that Chris Bean and I had after one of the podcasts when we were talking about the aspect, right? It's like, do you guys even have a market for folks that are seeking that level of instructor development? And he was like, yeah, man, it's actually pretty, it's not unbelievable, but it was heartwarming to hear that kind of perspective on it. And then, so I guess where I want to take that question is that it's a little bit of a segue off to it. Let me make sure. Kinetic, I know you're asking a ton of great questions in the comment section, but I'm not going to butcher your name, but we have a comment about there, a question about wanting to get the everyday person. So we'll get to that kind of topic. But before we segue out to that, I want to talk about how I was going to ask how critical is the student's first instructor, but I want to kind of tweak that to really get your perspective, because at some point, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at some point during your firearms training journey, you connected with an instructor that instilled inside of you some part of that level to seek out the best instructor. And I would say, how critical is it for some of the new instructors to find the right mentor to kind of not latch onto, but to kind of learn from and develop? And that's whether having a personal relationship or just kind of watching them from afar.
Let me add to that real quick before you call on somebody. I want to add, instead of find that one mentor or that instructor, I think we need to add a little S to the end of that, because we get into these things, and everybody on here probably knows about the vacuum of instructors, to where if you get on one instructor's page, if there's any deviation on the belief of what that instructor has, you're a complete know-nothing moron, right? If this is your first day shooting. So I want to add to that. I think it's instructors in the beginning. For my road, I've taken quite a few instructor training courses and stuff like that. And then, of course, Tim lives in my backyard, so it's easy for me to have him as my mentor. But I still am seeking other instruction, because there may be something that someone else has, that Dan has or Chris or Mikos has, that can just say it a little bit differently, that gives me that little bit of that aha moment, right? That I can take that and tweak it into along with my mentor and bring it to him as well. So a little bit about that. Sorry, Jeremy, I interrupted.
No, it's great, man. I think that kind of feeds into the question well. Chris, let's put you in the hot seat first on that. How critical is it for instructors to find a good role model?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. And I think it's something that's severely lacking in the instructorship circles, where it's been for a long time, where it's islands, right? Where people's ego leads first. So they don't want to seek betterment. They don't want to, talk through ideas. Oh, someone's going to steal my stuff or something like that. And it's detrimental to the craft. So I'll just kind of personalize it for me. Like I said earlier in my intro, I've been doing this, a quarter century, a long time. Probably 15 of those years, I was completely static, no better than I was when I started. And then I ran into a gentleman named Gabe White. And that's kind of the first person to me that showed you could unequivocally be yourself. Because here's like a tidbit for instructors out there. Students do not buy your information. They buy you. Soon as you understand that, it's a different game. Soon as you start being yourself and providing things, not what you learned in a book, not what you learned in some class, but your interpretation of that. That's how you get outreach. That's how you start building reputation. That's how things start getting better for you. But that initial interaction I had with Gabe changed the way I looked at instructorship. Because if I know most everyone here on the panel knows Gabe in some way, shape, or form, or has trained with him, he's a unique individual, but he's also incredibly good at what he does. And that kind of got me on a kick of, one, starting to try and get better myself, two, trying to really starting to own what I do. Like when I teach or when I have conversations like this, sorry, folks, this is me. It's not a mask. Like these are the same conversations I have with my friend group, my peer group. So that started me on a road of trying to establish and find a peer group that I can really talk about the hardships of instructorship, talk about the insecurity feelings of instructorship, the imposter stuff, and you start working that out, and that's how you level up in a significant way. So honestly, I wish more people were open to that, where, there's groups on Facebook that I've entered into that I just couldn't stay in, because anytime, as someone that tries to help instructors be better, I go and make comments that are 100% not attacking or anything like that, just simply querying why someone thinks the way they think. And it's an immediate attack and immediate argument. And that tells me, I hate to say it like this, but someone's insecure with their abilities. And that's sad, because I think as the instructor circles have grown, and the prevalent people that are coming up now, they're not looking to burn you down. They're looking to help you be better, because I think we all have the same end goal, and that's to keep people alive. If that is not your end goal, if it's to protect your intellectual property, you're in the wrong business, bro. You are.
Is there any IP in firearms training anymore? I mean,
People think there is, but like the IP, like that went away in like 1934.
Awesome. Dan or Memphis, do you guys have any additional thoughts on that topic?
They hate it when I go first.
Stealing thunder over there. No, it's it's one of those things. As an instructor, as a student, that's what I seek out, right? It's who are these other instructors training with, and who are these other instructors bringing on as their AIs, right? Like we're seeing AJ Zito, coming into his own right over the last few years. And then, so now it's like, hey, this guy recommends this instructor or brings this instructor out, puts his name on him. And it's like, well, who's Chris training with, or who does Chris recommend? Who is Dan taking classes with, or collaborating with right now, because the level of collaboration between different instructors is pretty awesome to see now, where we have, different, right? We're in the industry, right? So it's competitors working together to raise the bar.
I think that's important to discuss. The collaboration efforts that are happening and that are available now, because of things like this, because of podcasts like this, because of social media groups, being able to find a mentor, being able to find somebody to identify with, to help walk you through uh, difficulties that you come up with, or problems that you encounter in your development as a instructor, as a shooter, even as just a person, somebody you identify with. Um, in case anybody doesn't know, the Chris Bean that you see on here is 100% the same Chris Bean that I have private conversations with offline on a regular basis. Everything about him is the same. His speech cadence, his language, the way he doesn't look you in the eye. I think that's the autism. It's just the the way Chris presents right here is the exact same way he presents in real life when he's grilling steaks on his back deck. That's Chris. He is somebody who is, for me, very easy to identify with, and we can have conversations about uh, emotionally charged topics, and I can gain stuff from him. Is he somebody I would have potentially looked at as a mentor even 5 or 6 years ago? I don't think so. But I have changed enough as a shooter. I've changed enough as an instructor that my needs of what I need in somebody to identify with have changed along with me. And I'm now at a point where he is one of the people I go to when I'm trying to work something out. And that is more available now than ever before. If the people who are in this seat, in the instructor seat, in the content creation era, people who are developing that IP, that intellectual property, if they're authentic in how they present here, I think the people who are coming up can much more easily identify potential people to reach out to at conferences like ASP, at conferences like A Girl and a Gun, at conferences like TACCon, and they can meet their internet friends and be like, I actually like the way you do talk. You are the person I see online. I'd really like to get your information and talk through some stuff, collaborate, get your assistance. And I know most of the people in this seat are really open to that. That's my take on it.
That's a great take. And it's cool to see that collaboration, right? And it's again, we're starting to see more and more of that interconnectedness where I think if you're looking at the group of instructors that you probably want to go out there and seek to train with, it's the dudes that have the mentality that the better job we do collectively as instructors, the bigger the pie gets. We're not splitting the same pie, right? We're helping grow the pie. And it's, Andy takes a crap load of courses, right? He's taken, I think he's taken like 4 classes over the next 2 weeks or something stupid, right? Like he's like, oh, I got Gabe White. I got Jedi. I think you're going to Jedi. He's got like 3 or 4 classes lined up over the next couple months. And it's dudes that they're not worried about it. And it's that's that emotional maturity that it's like, hey, I don't need, if Chris is training people, that's great. I can also train people. Chris isn't taking bread off of my table or money out of my wallet. He's not taking food off of my kids' table. It's we're growing this thing and reaching more people. I want to get caught up with a couple questions that we have before we move into the next kind of deal. And I don't know if this is Bella Memphis. I don't know. She was commenting. I have a question about overcoming barriers and gaining students. I want Susie Homemaker. I want the everyday person, not the professional student. So Memphis, what are your thoughts on growing your student base and reaching more people, so that you get the newer shooters and you're not necessarily getting the same, you're not getting Andy in class every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, no,
So
I'm still a new shooter. Hold on. I'm still a new shooter. I need to be in that class. Just saying.
okay. But Beulah Ballbricker, she's an excellent human being. You know what I mean? I would hang out with her if she was a truck driver with a high point, I wouldn't, like, she's just awesome. But she just so happens to be a phenomenal shooter, an excellent instructor, and as well as a fellow Marine. So, we Marines are kind of representing tonight. But I think she's on the right track as far as identifying who she wants in class, right? Like the person that calls to her. And I would say, if it was up to me, I would say, okay, let's get more of those people and have conversations with them and say, okay, what do you want from me? Like, what's the best way that I can serve you? Like, what kind of services are you looking for? And what are your main concerns and what are your main goals? Like, really not so much worded exactly like that. I would really just kind of get as many people like that as possible together and just try to understand, like, hey, try to empathize with their situation and understand what are your main pain points? Like, what are you really, really trying to understand? Like, all the conversations that I've had with Susie Homemaker really just come down to mainly like three different things, really. Number one, like, how can I store this thing inside of my house without my kids getting to it? Right. Number two, how do I not get locked up in jail? And number three, how can I actually use this thing for, its intended purpose? Like the guy that wants to rob or kill or cripple me, how do I use it for that? And the unfortunate thing is it's going to take a little bit of time to get through all of those topics, to get them to get Susie Homemaker, get her to a point where she's actually going to be comfortable with this thing. And, they need to know that up front. We got to be able to set those expectations ahead of time. So, like, one thing I'll say this, and then I'll pass the talking stick, right? And I'll use this little beard brush as the talking stick here. I'll pass that in just a second. But so when we teach permit classes here in the state of Tennessee, one of the first things I tell them is this is the stuff that we have to set the expectation. This is the stuff that we're going to cover here in the next 8 hours. But there are some things that you should probably know. And one of those things is that this right here is the period of instruction that the state of Tennessee requires you to have if you're going to carry around that card, if you're going to be, authorized to carry a loaded gun in public. It is not a self-defense class. And that opens up some eyes. People kind of wake up and they perk their ears up a little bit and they're like, well, wait, I signed up for a self-defense class. Like, no, this is not a self-defense class. This is a concealed carry class. And those are two different things. And unfortunately, there are funds. You can't go out into the lobby and say, hey, this isn't what I thought it was. All right. So it is an opportunity for you to understand what this teaches you and what this doesn't teach you. Like, we're not going to be shooting from the holster. We're not going to be talking about, what kind of gun would probably be best for your mission. What kind of ammo is effective and what's not going to be junk. What kind of holsters are actually going to be quality. That's not going to be part of the conversation. We're not going to be talking about, criminology. We're not going to be talking about, like effective distances or anything like that. What we are going to talk about, we're going to talk about safety. We're going to talk about your rules of engagement, where you can and cannot go, what you can and cannot do. We're going to shoot a short course of fire. probably the easiest course of fire that you will ever have in your life. And then if you pass that and the written test, you're gonna get a piece of paper that says, hey, you can carry this thing around, or you'll be able to apply for that. Unfortunately, it's not really going to cover a whole lot of what you actually need to know in order for you to defend yourself and your loved ones. It's not going to answer a lot of the questions that you have about safe storage. And if you're lucky, if you're taking well enough notes, then it'll answer your questions about safety. But those are going to be the conversations that you're going to have with Susie Q Homemaker. What are you really looking for from a firearms instructor? And then you have to match that up to the skill set that you have. You got to be honest with yourself about, is that something I can provide? And if not, then that needs to change.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Memphis. That's one thing that I always say with our concealed carry class too. The first thing after introduction is, hey, this is not a class about shooting. Is we're going to do a little bit of shooting built in here. This class isn't about shooting. It's about everything we can do to avoid shooting, and if all possible. But if we have to use this firearm, we're going to get a little into that too. So I agree with that. By the way, Beulah Ballbreaker, I liked her in the movie Porky's too, by the way. So just so you know, if you guys haven't seen Porky's, then you're failing, and I don't care how old you are. You haven't seen, you got to ask her where Beulah Ballbreaker comes from. That's from the movie Porky's, guys. Come on.
I thought it was German. I don't know.
I thought it was a real name. Hey, Andy, before you jump off topic, Andy, I think Dan had a follow-up. I don't know if you were segueing off or staying on this.
I was, but you cut me off. That's cool, Jeremy. That's fine.
You were segueing off, or you were staying on the topic?
No, I was going to move over to Dan, but that's cool.
Oh, yeah.
That's
okay.
fine,
No, I did.
That's cool. I'm used to it. That's fine. Just kidding.
So to answer her question, community outreach is super, super important. Taking your business public into non-gun spaces. This is a thing that Apache does with a great deal of regularity. We go to the local, fall festivals, the Apple Festival. We go to the parades, in a couple of counties right around Yadkinville. That the entire purpose of the organization, A Girl and a Gun, is community outreach to people who might not necessarily be focused on guns. Like they have this thing in their home or are thinking about having this thing in their home, but they don't necessarily know where to go. And the gun space may look intimidating from the outside, but that's what that organization is there for. So putting stuff out into your local community in spaces that you might not think about advertising, putting a table out there at your local, Veterans Day parade or Memorial Day parade or whatever it happens to be, and just be open and be friendly and greeting everybody and not looking like a psychopath. You probably don't want me standing at your booth. That community outreach is super, super important. Go to non-gun spaces and fly your flag. That's where you're going to get the Susie Homemaker. That's where you're going to get the non-continuous professional student. You're going to get the gun curious to steal what David Yamani's word, gun curious. So that's my input on her question.
And I've got some on this one too, guys, if you don't mind. So this kind of, I'm going to date myself again. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember, but this is like one of those, how do I get a job without a car? How do I get a car without a job kind of PSA things, right? How do you find your target clientele? And what I try and tell people all the time is reputation, reputation, reputation. Especially if you're trying to get that entry or gateway student. And I'm going to frame it specifically with the question, how she said, like Susie Homemaker. First thing that I think no one really does that they should, and I guess I never really preface it, but I come from a business background. I would almost bet you money if you went out and said, hey, has anyone struggling with finding clientele ever written an engagement plan, like wrote it down, what it is they want to do. I've yet to find anyone that's done that, maybe one or two people. But like just some ideas of things if you're looking for like that target female market, your chamber of commerce, local women's groups, church groups, the PTA, domestic support groups, Facebook, find any kind of groups that are local to your community with that target clientele in it. Here's the key. Don't go out trying to sell your product. It screams of desperation and no one will want to come to you. Go trying to help people. So if somebody has kind of an idea or a question that kind of branches into what you're talking about, help them. That's a big part of how I built my client base. And I have never, and this is no exaggeration, I have never spent $1 in my entire life on advertising, not one. But what I do is go out actively trying to help people. And that person will tell somebody else, and that's worth vastly more than any money you kind of spend on marketing. So that one lady that you get, or that one person that you get, will tell their friends, they will tell their friends, they will tell their friends, but it requires patience. And that's what I think people want, like a quick return. They want to be able to see a metric on screen, like, okay, this many clicks equated to that. But in the business we're in, it's one of the few businesses that are still word of mouth driven, where people are going to go to you because someone that they care about and trust said you are worth going to. So seek it out. Much like Dan said, seek out your community, be that SME in your community, find that target market and be there to help them, and the rest will take care of itself.
There's a quote, and I don't know who it's attributed to, but it's in the service industry, it's like, if you worry about the money, the customer's not going to come. If you worry about the customer, the money will come. And it's continually adding value. I've spent a ton of money on advertising. I messaged Andy last week and I was like, dude, Google just updated our account. And here's I sent him a screenshot of the requirement. And one of them was an obscenely large amount of advertising dollars spent with Google. And I was like, dude, I had no idea that we've spent that much money advertising with Google. And it's one of the things where, a lot of people talk about social media marketing, and for me, that paid advertising, especially through like Facebook, is great to like create an introduction and provide value to folks. It rarely works when you're like, here's a class, sign up for it. The better tool to use is how do you increase the number of people that you're reaching, that you're adding value to, and then become that person that adds value. And one of the I want to give a shout out to a couple Facebook groups is the Deliberate Training Group V.2 and the Ask Dry Fire Training Group. Those are probably the two most valuable Facebook groups that I'm a part of, and the value that is, the knowledge that is shared in there by subject matter experts is mind-boggling to me. And I'm like, I sit back and sometimes somebody will chime in, and it's usually Chris, Dan, or Memphis chiming in on somebody else, like somebody else's, like Riley's comment is like, hey, you guys should be paying money for the knowledge that he's dropping right now. Like, take notes. Like, this is, and it's all, and not once have I seen advice, a snippet of advice, and a link to sign up for a class. So this is information that is just freely being shared and given, where top level instructors are just sharing knowledge, and it's right for the taking. So if you guys are on Facebook, if you're not on Facebook, sign up with a fake account and join those two groups. In a minute, we can kick it around. And if there's any other Facebook groups, because I kind of want to segue before, as we take the last 15, 20 minutes or so of this episode, I kind of want to segue into some training specific topics, and just kind of look at, from a student's perspective, not even a student's perspective, but what can we do as shooters to improve our baseline skills and abilities. And I want to start that with dry fire, and I want to start that with the dry fire king himself, probably the most humble dude in firearms training out there, If you can't see Memphis, he is blushing right now. He's wiping away tears. He's a super humble dude. And I had the opportunity to take his his virtual dry fire course and seminar a few months back. And it was, as somebody who thought I was dry firing correctly and thought I was doing it well, it was very eye-opening and educational for me. So let's kind of start there. Let's start with the free training that everybody at home can do right now. I want to start with Memphis and get your best advice for a dry fire regimen.
Wow, that's a bold question. The best advice I can give for a dry fire regimen,
Or
so
anything dry fire related. Like, let's introduce people to dry fire, and hopefully we can give somebody that dry fire bug.
well, as far as dry fire goes, I think the best thing that people can do is shatter their expectations of dry fire, because people set the bar so high on dry fire that instead of dry firing on a daily basis, there's only maybe 1 or 2 days a week or 3 or 4 days a month that all the magic stars will align and they actually meet their perfect expectations of dry fire. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. So a lot of people's expectation of dry fire is, well, I need to have my holster, because I need to practice my draw to first shot. That is the most important thing I can practice. So I gotta have my holster on, which means having my pants on, which means having my belt on, which means all the other stuff. And then also I have to have my gun. And even though it's already, it's still in the holster and it's still prepped for me to leave the house in the morning, it's already there. So I have to undo all that so I can clear the gun. And then I got to get whatever kind of tool I need, like, like a laser thingamabob or, whatever, And then on top of that, they're like, okay, I need to have the energy to do that, because if I'm tired, then, I'm not going to be able to pay attention to everything I need to do. I need 30 minutes. A lot of people think they need 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes to dry fire. And it's all too much. Okay. Like if all those stars don't align, you're not going to dry fire. Instead, how about we shatter those expectations and let's get some of the tips from James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. Use like super, super small habits, go in itty bitty tiny steps, and just build up so that we can build ourselves a habit of dry fire. Okay. And just building a habit is probably the most important thing. Just staying consistent is the most important thing. And instead of your holster and all your other things, you can really just use your hands. I can sit here and practice without my hands and go and just practice. Tatiana Whitlock does it. Gabe White does it. Those are the guys that I learned about that from. So is using your gun better than using empty hands? Yes. But if that's all you have, then that's all you have. Okay. Is using a plastic replica gun better than empty hands? Yes. But if that's all you have, that's all you have. So you don't need your holster. You don't need to, if you are going to use an actual gun, absolutely 100% clear it. Okay. Use the dry fire safety rules, which go in tandem with the universal safety rules. They overlap. So what do you need? You need, really, if you could just do 2 minutes, just 2 minutes a day, not even 30 minutes, not even 20 minutes, not even 10 minutes, not even 5 minutes. If you could just do 2 minutes a day, if that's all you have, that's better than nothing. All right. Like, is 5 minutes better than 2 minutes? Yes, it is. Is 20 minutes better than 2 minutes? Yes, it is. But if that's all you have, that's all you have. The most important thing is just to build a habit of dry fire. I want you to get so much in the habit of dry fire that you can't go to bed at night until you get your 2 minutes in, right? Like, I wanted to get to a point where, it's almost like brushing your teeth or taking a shower. It just doesn't feel right until I get my dry fire in. And that's where we're going to actually start to build upon, that consistency, that's the main thing that a lot of people are really missing. That's probably the most important thing. other than just, your basic dry fire safety rules. Like that's something that the industry really needs to standardize a little bit more. And I'm trying really hard to do all that. So not to take too much time from everybody else, but yeah, I'm still working on standardizing those dry fire safety rules and spreading the message on that. I think that's something that the industry really needs as a whole, like to codify those dry fire safety rules.
No, I agree. And it's, some people are using firearm safety rules that won't allow you to dry fire, right? It's like never point your gun at anything that you're not willing to kill or destroy. And if it's a simple safety rule, it's, are we making exceptions to it? And it's, well, I don't think we need to. And I like, I was watching the evidence-based pistol skills course on the ASP Unlimited app, and reading through or listening to the safety brief that they give in that. And John talks about it's, point your firearm in the direction of least consequence. And I'm like, man, that's a really profound way of explaining that, because that kind of sums up everything, right? Like the direction of least consequence, and what consequences are we willing to accept? Well, a consequence of pointing your gun at a bad guy is you might shoot him. I'm willing to accept that, right? Because I probably, if I shot him, I needed to shoot him. So I think that is a great point. Is we need to specifically for dry fire, because there are other issues in dry fire that aren't necessarily safety concerns on a live fire range. Dan, let's get your thoughts on dry fire practice or training, and then if you want to segue into live fire, we can do that as well, and then we'll kind of go around the horn.
Like Memphis said, a lot of people, I need this to dry fire. I need my holster. I need my belt. I need my dummy rounds. I need my, safety barrel block. I need my laser. I need my mantis. I need to set up this entire thing. And Mikos, I got to say thank you about that whole dry fire habit. Building that habit. So yesterday, I'll just use myself as an example. Yesterday, I just didn't have it in me to get all my stuff. I was in Sunday mode, right? Chilling. But it needed to happen because I didn't feel right. So I spent a grand total of 7 minutes, only 7 minutes. I didn't have my holster on. I didn't even have pants on. All I had was sweat shorts on. That's all I had. And I did 7 minutes of table starts with my pistol. Unloaded gun table start. Turned on my Range Buddy virtual coach dry fire app, set it on repeat, and I had my 2-second par time. Beep, load the gun, on target, bang. I did 2-hand table starts. I did 1-hand table starts. I did weekend only table starts. 7 minutes later, I was like, that's all I have in me. I put the dummy rounds away, reloaded the gun, put it back on my nightstand, and went and sat back in my recliner and watched a show with my wife. And that was it. But I got my 7 minutes in because it needed to happen. It's building that habit. It's super important, but I didn't want to put pants on. I just didn't want to put pants on. Some days you just don't want to put pants on. And Chris never wants to put pants on. And you can do important dry fire work if you can connect your mind to your hands and your eyes. You can do important dry fire work with very, very little in the way of preparation, extra tools, things of that nature. You can do important stuff with a short amount of time and very little in the way of equipment. And that's thanks to my boy Mikos Beach.
Are you guys wearing pants? Those were optional, I thought, for this evening. So
no comment.
Okay. All right. So I'm the only one. Cool. Good deal. Chris, let's get your thoughts on dry fire training.
So, and I'm going to kind of frame this dry live however you want to apply it. But I think the biggest hurdle and the thing I would like to give advice on the most to people is please, 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 for the love of God, please stop comparing yourself to others. Like Roosevelt has a quote, it's kind of unknown, but like the thief of joy is comparison, or comparison is the thief of joy. And what inevitably happens is we're like subject to a barrage of highlight reels. If you're on social media at all, you're only seeing the best of what people can do. And what that does to people over time, especially if you're at the novice or intermediate level, it people just don't want to try because they can't do that. And what I think doesn't happen enough is every single one of us, anyone with any modicum of skill, started in the same exact place. And that's kind of where dry fire and habit stuff like that, you do not have to share everything you do. Work through it. Like the other thing I try and tell people too, and I get pushback a lot, but shooting is not hard. You know, from a physical kind of activity, it's not hard to do. The mental approach is what holds people back, where they think they have to meet some imaginary metric. So they throw the baby out with the bathwater, and then they wonder why they don't progress. So really, from me, the first and foremost thing I would tell somebody, stop worrying about what everyone else is doing. Build a habit, much like, and I'll throw some sunshine on Mikos as well. Like from his dry fire clinic that I got, he showed like a dry erase board, and I went and got a 48 by 60 dry erase calendar and went down a rabbit hole on how long it takes to build a habit. And the consensus I found was 66 days. So I was like, okay, well, 66 days, I need to know, I need to do this every day, whether it's 2 minutes, whether it's 20 minutes, whatever. That's the other thing. If you're going to dry fire, like we talk about time, versus talking about time and putting yourself on a regimen, dry fire until you're no longer engaged. When you lose engagement and you're not paying attention, stop. If that's 2 minutes, if that's an hour, it doesn't matter. But anything past that point no longer matters. You're just throwing a gun out into the air. You're not collecting data. It's not doing anything. But build a habit out of it. And really, you have to measure your expectations on what you want. Do you want to be the best in the world? If you want to be the best in the world, that is a different plan that you need to implement. If you want to simply be a capable defender, that is really easy to achieve. The hard part is you have to do some work, and there's a big difference there. But that's my take on that, and apply that as you will.
And it can ebb and flow, and that's something. It was one of you guys after one of our podcasts where I was talking about where one of the things that I struggle with is I don't have the time. I haven't committed the time to that's necessary to get to the next level. And I think it was you, Chris, and you were like, something along the lines is you're where you're at, you're where you need to be, right? And there's a season of life and a period of life where you might not have the time or the resources to dedicate the amount of time that you need to get to the level you want to be at. And don't beat yourself. And I think that's what I came away from that is like, hey, don't beat yourself up, right? Because you have to, right? There are other commitments that you have in your life, right? There are family, there are friends commitments. We had a couple guest panelists that was, hey man, sorry, I'm not able to join us tonight, or I'm not able to join and I got to back out. And I'm like, dude, that stuff is first and foremost, man. Like you're, because what if you're out there, I'm preparing myself to be the best defender. I'm spending all of my time to where if this bad guy robs me in the Walmart parking lot or whatever, then I'm going to be able to save my family. And it's like, yeah, but what are you sacrificing to that ends to get to that? So understand what you're most likely going to need. Get yourself to that baseline skill set. And for me, I've kind of settled in on that. Hey, I'm better than what the most likely skill set I'm going to need in that moment. So now how do I allocate my resources to where I can still be a decent person to other people in life, where I'm not just this gun nut. So, and Memphis, I know you had something on that. Let's kick it to you, bud.
Yeah, I'm finding that out right now with a 1-year-old in the house, and I'm quickly running out of time to do a lot of the things I enjoy. I'm going to be really quick, and then I'll pass the buck. I said earlier that, one of my goals is to be a GM in USPSA, to be a grandmaster. Yes, that is a goal of mine, and I'm working every day towards that goal. I'm quickly becoming a grandmaster. Uh, that is something that I am becoming. I am not willing to sacrifice my marriage for that. I'm not willing to sacrifice the relationship with my son, with my family. I'm not willing to do that. And if it means that I'm a good father and a good husband, but I never make grandmaster, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, AJ Zito said in one of a class with Tim Herron, and I'll kick it over to Dan because I see he has something there. But AJ Zito said, "You deserve what you work on," and I wrote that down, and I actually always look at it because it's like you don't work on it, you don't dry fire, you don't deserve to get to a GM, or you don't deserve to get a sub 1 second draw, or whatever your goal is, right? If you don't work on it, you don't deserve it. That's what it comes down to. So that's something that always hit me really well.
You may not deserve, I mean, I'm not going to say you don't deserve a good marriage. You don't deserve a relationship with your kids, but, you work on it.
Yeah,
You work
absolutely.
on it.
In order for me to be married, well, we've been married 5 years. I've been with my wife over 20 years. You know how we got there? We worked on it. Now we deserve each other and we've done really well, right? And that's what it comes down to. So with the dry fire thing, I think one more thing to just point out real quick, and I'll pass to Dan, is consistency. And that's where I'm gonna hit myself. Um, as I mentioned, I'm going to a Jedi class, or Jeremy mentioned it, right? So what am I doing now? Oh, I got to dry fire every day. I got to work on my draw. I got to do this. I should have been doing this months ago. But this year's been some change things. I got a new grill and other things, this and that, whatever. But really, consistency is key. So I wanted to go for that black belt patch, but the thing is I haven't really worked on my dry fire. I haven't worked on what I need to work on, and I'm gonna try. But I really deserve what I get when I go there, right? Doesn't mean I'm not gonna learn. Doesn't mean I'm not gonna try. Doesn't mean I'm gonna work hard. But really, consistency is key to dry fire too, because it's everything else. You lose it, you don't use it, you lose it. We have that whole saying of like we're going to result to our lowest standard of training if we ever need it. So we have to have that consistency. Dan?
Something Chris said, and I just said it in the chat here, so I would remind myself. Um, the highlight reels of social media and showing this incredibly high bar that exists. Post your failures. I've kind of focused on that myself recently. The 52 week, 52 cards in the deck thing. I've been very consistent with that, 10 weeks in a row. But yeah, I had two weeks where I dropped around. Oh well, I'm not gonna post that because it's not indicative of what I know I'm capable of. I know what I'm capable of. Um, but I think it's important to show the folks out there who haven't attained, you know, yeah, cold, I can step out there and I can do it in 3 seconds, or I can do it in 2.75 seconds, or whatever it happens to be. It's important that you maintain some level of relatability to the folks who are out there trying to get there. Maintaining this appearance of perfection or appearance of infallibility is disingenuous. It's ego driven, and I'll be honest, I don't like it. It bothers me when I see this not posting, maybe not failures, but this is what I'm going for. I did not meet that, right? I think showing the work, you always got told when you were in elementary school, at least this generation of people did, you got to show your work on your math homework. You can't just write the answer in. You got to show your work. I think we all need to get in the habit of showing our work. And, you know, I'll just speak for myself. I'm going to start putting a couple of my practice sessions live out there. I'm gonna actually just do it live and not have it recorded so that people do see the failures, you know what, this did not go the way I intended it to, and this is where I erred. So that means in my dry fire practice over the course of the next week, I really got to focus on whatever it happened to be that I screwed up in that. And, you know, that puts some additional pressure on you to perform. You know, that kind of goes into the mental management thing that Chris Bean is the master of where is your head at while you're under that sort of pressure. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch on the idea of, for folks in our space, posting your failures and not trying to maintain some air of infallibility.
Yeah, that's I think we need to normalize that. And I love that idea, is because if we don't, because it's so easy to see everybody, the perfect run and the attaboys in there. But the learning happens when Andy posted a video, right? He's posted a couple videos in the deliberate training group. And one of the things on there, he's like, roast me or coach me, you know what I mean? Something to that effect. And, you know, it was like, oh, hey, it was great. Work on this, right? Work on the, you know, hey, slow it down right before finishing your full extension. You know, looking the gun back in the holster. But for me, a lot of the tidbits of knowledge that I picked up along the way were from shadow reading comments, right? Where I'm not necessarily chiming in on the deal, and even the arguments. And that's a battle that I've had to kind of have with myself, and I've had it with some other folks. Is it's like, yeah, it's a lot of times it's pointless to argue with the guy on Facebook, but the benefit for others who are reading the reasonable, the level-headed, the educated comments far outweighs the fact that, yeah, this knucklehead isn't going to change his opinion or his perspective. But how many other people are going to read through those comments? And it starts off, you know, let me get my popcorn, let me read the shit show in the comments. And then you're like, oh man, this is really, you know, that's a really good piece of advice. I need to implement that. And we never, or not never, it's very rare that somebody comes back and says, hey, that BS Facebook argument that what you were in, you provided some clear guidelines and examples on what to do or what that guy could have done. And yeah, he didn't take it and he fought you back on it, but it really helped me, right? Like, I don't think there's enough of that going on to really, to make it worthwhile, because it starts to beat down on folks. And you can see it where people are like, dude, I just comment less, man, because the most vocal people are out there. They're just kind of crap posting. And it's, but if we normalize that, hey, sharing the work that you're putting in, I think we'll see more and more of that happening. And then more and more folks are going to really reap the benefit of that, what these platforms could be for us. And I know everybody's like, oh, anti-social media because they don't like guns, but there's a lot of good work happening, right? Those two groups, the deliberate training group, the AAP dry fire group. And before we wrap up, Chris, Memphis, Dan, are there any other groups that you guys want to shout out that folks should be looking to join? And by folks, I mean me.
I mean, for me, those are the two I run. So I struggle with social media and like the utter fakeness of it. So those two are the ones that I kind of frequent now. There have been a time when I had like 100 groups I was in, but I only have so much time, right? So I try and kind of stay within like just a couple that I feel that the stuff can be heard. So, man, I hate to say it, but those are really, I think, the only two groups I'm in right now.
Yeah, there's and it's cool because a lot of these instructors, a lot of these well-respected folks, they're devoting their time to these groups. And I get personal sometimes because I'm like, man, you're going to run somebody off. Somebody's going to be like, hey, I don't have time for this anymore. And thankfully, a lot of those folks that are providing the valuable content are sticking around and they're staying engaged. And that's a testament to you guys that are running that group, because it's obviously still worth it to a lot of those folks that are providing the great information. So we've been here close to 2 hours now. I know a couple of you folks are an hour ahead of us. So I definitely want to give you guys the rest of the evening back. We really, truly appreciate you jumping on here and sharing the insight and the knowledge. We're gonna come back next week. We're gonna do another roundtable discussion. I think this one went very well, and we're gonna kind of pick it up from where we left off today. So we'll talk about regimenting and training and practice and how to find a good coach and all of that good stuff. So it's gonna be another great couple hours next Monday. Before we jump off, any final thoughts? Is there anything that again, the laziest podcaster in the history of podcasting, I'm going to ask you, our guests, what I should have asked you, right? So is there anything that we should have talked about that we hadn't touched on that you want to get in before we wrap up tonight? All right, good deal. Well, Andy, you have any final thoughts for our folks?
As always, thank you guys for coming on. We all have busy lives. Chris was just mentioning he's got to work in about 4 hours, poor baby. But it's a great having you guys all on. It's great conversation. I'm looking forward to next Monday so we can continue this process and answer a lot of these questions. And I think there's times where some of these things are going to come up in the future, and I'm just going to be like, here's a link, watch this show, because here's a lot of great answers that typically back and forth about these things that never get resolved. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it. It was awesome.
It's always fun to talk to you guys.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. Y'all stay safe, and we'll see you next week.